Back in 2016, I was 20 years old and starting my second year at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. Like most students, I wasn't thrilled about dorm life, but it was cheap, and I figured I'd put up with the noise, the crowded hallways, and the paper-thin walls for another year. At least I'd have my own room this time. The dorm I was assigned to wasn't new. In fact, it was one of the older buildings on campus, a squat red brick structure that looked more like a hospital than student housing. The hallways smelled faintly of dust and old carpet cleaner, and the walls were painted a dull beige that probably hadn't been touched up since the 80s. My room was small but manageable, a bed wedged against one wall, a desk under the window, and a dresser that barely fit in the corner. The only thing that stood out was the phone. It sat on the desk like it belonged there, an old beige landline with a coiled cord and a cracked plastic handset. At first, I thought it was just leftover junk, maybe something left by the last student. Phones like that hadn't been used in years. Everyone I knew had a smartphone. I remember picking it up and finding no dial tone. Dead silence. I left it there, figuring I'd shove it in a drawer later. The first few nights passed without issue. I went to class, studied, played games on my laptop. Normal stuff. But every time I glanced at that phone, it made me uneasy. Something about the way it sat there, like it was waiting for me, bothered me more than I wanted to admit. I told myself I was being paranoid. It was just a piece of dead plastic, but I wasn't prepared for what would happen a few nights later, when it rang for the first time. It was just after midnight when it happened. I was lying in bed, half asleep, when the silence of the room was broken by a sound I hadn't heard in years. The phone rang. Not my cell, not the alarm clock, the landline. The sharp, metallic jingle jolted me upright. For a second, I just stared at it across the room, lit faintly by the glow of my laptop screen. I told myself it was impossible. That phone wasn't even connected to anything. But it rang again. Cautiously, I got up and picked up the receiver. My hand trembled slightly as I pressed it to my ear. Hello? At first, nothing, just static, like a radio between stations. Then faintly, I heard breathing. Slow, steady, deliberate. Who is this? I asked, trying to sound more annoyed than scared. The static hissed louder. And then, beneath it, I heard something else. A voice. It was hard to make out, but the words chilled me to the bone. I can see you. I froze. My eyes swept around the room, out the window, even toward the crack under the door. My dorm was on the 4th floor. There was no way anyone could be seeing me at that moment. Is this a joke? I snapped, but my voice cracked halfway through. The line went dead. I stood there with the phone pressed to my ear, listening to nothing. After a minute, I set it back on the desk, heart hammering. I told myself it had to be some kind of old wiring, maybe interference. It was an ancient building after all. I crawled back into bed and pulled the covers over me, trying to laugh it off. But the worst part was, deep down, I knew that voice wasn't coming from outside. It sounded exactly like mine. For a couple of nights after that, nothing happened. I started to convince myself it was a one-time glitch. Maybe some old wiring had caught a signal, or some student thought it would be funny to mess with me. But on the 4th night, right as the clock on my desk clicked past midnight, the phone rang again. The same shrill metallic ring. This time I hesitated. I sat up in bed staring at it, every instinct telling me not to answer. But the longer it rang, the more it felt like the sound was drilling into my skull. Finally, I picked up. Hello? Static. Then beneath it, the faint sound of breathing again. But this time, the voice was clearer. Why did you move into my room? I nearly dropped the phone. My throat went dry. "Who is this?" No response. Just a low chuckle, soft and raspy, followed by the click of the line going dead. From that night on, the calls came regularly, always just after midnight, every single night. Sometimes the voice whispered things I couldn't fully make out. Other times it repeated my name over and over until I slammed the phone down. Once I heard it softly humming a song I recognized, a lullaby my mom used to sing when I was little. I stopped sleeping properly. I'd lie in bed staring at the ceiling, waiting for the ring, dreading it but knowing it would come. I even unplugged the phone completely, shoving the cord behind the desk. But at midnight, it rang anyway, just as loud as before, and every time, the voice sounded a little closer. By the second week, I was unraveling. My grades were slipping. I looked half dead in the mirror, and my friends kept asking if I was okay. I couldn't tell them the truth. Who would believe me if I said a disconnected landline kept ringing every night at midnight? One afternoon, after another sleepless night, I finally went to the dorm supervisor, an older woman named Mrs. Keller. She was the kind of person who had probably heard every excuse in the book from students, so I tried to keep my voice calm as I explained. "There's a phone in my room," I said. "An old one. It rings every night, and when I answer it, there's someone on the other end, breathing, talking." She gave me a look halfway between disbelief and concern. "Are you sure it's not a prank? Maybe one of your neighbors?" I shook my head. "No, it's not possible. The phone isn't even plugged in, but it keeps ringing. And whoever it is, they know things about me. Personal things." For a long moment, Mrs. Keller just stared at me. Then, instead of dismissing me, she sighed heavily. "Which room are you in?" "Room 409, I said. Her face paled ever so slightly, and that was the first time I realized she already knew something. She leaned closer, her voice dropping. "That room should have been cleared out. The phone shouldn't even be there." I frowned. "What do you mean?" She hesitated before finally speaking. "A few years ago, a student, well, he wasn't doing well. He stopped going to classes, wouldn't talk to anyone. His parents couldn't reach him. One night, campus security found him in that room. He had taken his own life, sitting right there by the phone." The air in my chest froze. "After that," she continued, "the university removed most of the old lines. But sometimes," she trailed off, shaking her head, "sometimes things linger." I wanted to argue, to tell her it was just some wiring issue. But in that moment, I knew she believed what she was telling me. And the worst part was, so did I. That night, I couldn't bring myself to sleep. I left the phone on the desk where it had always sat, its cracked plastic handset gleaming faintly in the glow from the street light outside my window. I thought about what Mrs. Keller had told me, about the student who had lived in that same room. By midnight, I was sitting upright in bed just waiting, and right on cue, the phone rang. I let it ring once, twice, 3 times. On the 4th, I picked it up with shaking hands. This time, there was no static, no faint breathing. The line was clear, so clear it was as if the person was standing right next to me. "Daniel." The voice was my own. I froze. The sound of my name and my own voice made every hair on my body stand on end. "Why did you move into my room?" it asked again, the same words I had heard before. Except now, there was something else in the tone. Anger, maybe, or grief. I wanted to hang up, to throw the receiver across the room, but I couldn't move. "Please," I whispered. "What do you want?" The voice didn't hesitate. "I want you to remember me." For a long, unbearable silence, nothing else came through. Just that presence on the other end, heavy and suffocating. And then, quietly, a click as the line went dead. The phone never rang again after that. I stayed in that dorm for another semester, but I never touched the handset again. I shoved it into the back of the closet and draped a towel over it like that would somehow keep it quiet. Eventually, I asked to be moved to another building, and no one questioned me. Even now, years later, I sometimes dream about that room, about the desk, the cracked phone, and the voice that sounded exactly like mine. And in those dreams, I always wake up just before the phone rings again.